Hey everyone, Ludwig here. So, imagine this. Clint Eastwood casually strolls into one of LA's most luxurious restaurants wearing nothing more than a simple polo shirt and slacks. No one even realized that this unassuming older man was the legendary actor and director himself. And that's when an arrogant waitress made the mistake of her career, trying to kick out and humiliate someone she thought was just another random customer. What she didn't know, Clint wasn't just a guest with a reservation. He owned the entire restaurant. What happened next? Well, it became a story that Hollywood would never forget. In classic Clint Eastwood fashion, he turned the moment into an unforgettable lesson on respect, one that left everyone in the restaurant stunned. It was a typical Friday evening at the Grand Oak. The recently renovated dining room buzzed with life. Young tech moguls in designer suits, social media influencers snapping pictures of their gold leaf desserts, and old money families enjoying their weekly traditions. And then, there was a man in a simple gray polo shirt and slacks, sitting quietly in his usual corner, sipping on whiskey. Most of the veteran staff knew exactly who he was. After all, how could they not? But 6 months ago, when Clint Eastwood quietly bought the Grand Oak, he had one request for the staff: treat him like any other customer. He believed a restaurant's real quality wasn't measured by how it treated celebrities, but by how it welcomed everyday people. But Rachel, the restaurant's newest waitress, had no clue who he was. Fresh out of a prestigious hospitality school and eager to grow her food influencer following, she spent her evening fawning over social media personalities and casting annoyed glances at the underdressed man sitting in her section. Thomas, the longtime manager, noticed Rachel's judgmental look from across the room. He'd seen her give the same look to other customers before, including a retired surgeon who had dared to wear loafers instead of formal shoes. But tonight was different. Tonight, Rachel's judgment would come with consequences she couldn't even imagine. As Rachel approached Clint's table, her heels clicking sharply, Thomas held his breath. The veteran staff tensed, sensing the calm before a storm. Meanwhile, Clint took another sip of his whiskey, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. With her phone partially visible in her apron pocket, Rachel gave him a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sir, I couldn't help but notice. You've been nursing that, well, house whiskey for a while now." Clint looked up, meeting her gaze with the steady calm that had intimidated Hollywood executives for decades. "It's a good whiskey," he replied simply. "Perhaps," Rachel continued, her tone dripping with fake politeness, "you'd be more comfortable at the bar? We're expecting several reserved parties, and this table," she gestured toward the pristine white tablecloth, "is typically for our dining guests." Nearby, a young busboy named Miguel overheard the exchange. He knew exactly who Clint was. He'd grown up watching Clint Eastwood films with his father. Miguel's hands tightened around the bus tub as he fought the urge to intervene. "I'm comfortable here," Clint said, his voice calm and deliberate, taking another unhurried sip of his drink. Rachel's professional facade cracked as she glanced at her watch and then at a group of young tech executives waiting by the host stand. "Sir," she said, her tone sharper now, "our executive chef prepares a very exclusive menu, and the prices reflect the caliber of this establishment." She eyed Clint's casual attire, clearly implying he didn't belong. At a nearby table, an older couple who had been regulars for decades shifted uncomfortably. The husband opened his mouth to speak, but his wife placed a hand on his arm, recognizing the look in Clint's eyes, the same look that had preceded some of cinema's most iconic moments. Clint set his glass down. "I'm aware of the prices," he said in that familiar gravelly tone, "and the chef's work." Rachel's polite veneer vanished completely. She pulled out her order pad with an irritated motion. "Shall I explain the menu to you slowly, perhaps?" she added, a clear jab at his age. That was the tipping point for Miguel, who stepped forward. "Miss Rachel," he said quietly, "maybe I should get Thomas." "Stay out of this," Rachel snapped, turning back to Clint. "Sir, this isn't some diner off the highway. This is the Grand Oak, a prestigious establishment. Times have changed, and we have standards." Clint placed his whiskey down deliberately, his movements subtle but commanding. "Times have changed," he repeated softly. The restaurant fell silent as Clint made a single phone call. "Jerry," he said, "bring the ownership papers and the renovation plans." What followed was a powerful lesson about humility, respect, and the true meaning of class. Clint didn't just fire Rachel, he gave her a choice: walk away or learn what true hospitality is all about. And in true Clint Eastwood style, that evening became the stuff of legends. Clint looked at Rachel, his legendary steady gaze cutting through the awkward silence like a knife. "You know, Rachel," he said calmly, "there's a story behind this place. 50 years ago, I came here for the first time. I wasn't famous, just a kid trying to make it. I didn't have much money, but the owner, Old Man Thompson, treated me like royalty. Not because of who I was, but because that's how he treated everyone. It didn't matter if you were a big shot or a nobody." He paused, letting his words sink in as he scanned the room. "When his son decided to sell the place 6 months ago, I bought it. Not to turn it into some fancy hotspot, but to preserve what it stood for: real hospitality, dignity, and respect. Those values matter more than designer suits or Instagram likes." Miguel stood straighter, his admiration for Clint written all over his face. The older couple at the next table exchanged approving nods, their expressions softening. Even the tech executives, who had been engrossed in their phones moments earlier, were now listening intently. Clint leaned forward slightly, his gravelly voice carrying a touch of warmth. "So, Rachel, the question isn't whether I belong here. The question is, do you understand what this place truly represents?" Rachel's face was a mix of shame and regret. Her eyes welled with tears as the weight of her actions fully hit her. She had judged Clint Eastwood, the man who owned the restaurant and embodied everything it stood for, without knowing the first thing about him. But what happened next stunned everyone. Clint's voice softened, and he smiled faintly. "I could fire you right now. You've insulted a guest, ignored a coworker's warning, and made assumptions that don't belong in a place like this. But that's not what the Grand Oak is about. This isn't about punishment. It's about learning." He gestured toward Miguel, who looked like he couldn't believe what was happening. "This young man here," Clint continued, "understood something you didn't. He didn't judge me by what I was wearing. He recognized me, not from social media, but because he watched my movies with his father. That's respect. And that's the kind of heart this place needs." Turning to Miguel, Clint asked with a quiet authority, "Son, how would you like to start training as a waiter? I think you'd do great in a role where you can show people what real service looks like." Miguel's eyes widened, and a grin spread across his face. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I'd be honored." Clint nodded approvingly and then turned back to Rachel. "Now, as for you, Rachel, you have a choice. You can leave here tonight and find a job at a place more focused on modern luxury. Or you can stay, learn from Miguel and the veteran staff, and understand what it means to treat everyone with respect. The decision is yours." Rachel wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her voice trembling. "I'd like to stay, Mr. Eastwood. I want to learn. If you'll give me the chance." "Good choice," Clint said with a faint smile, finishing the last sip of his whiskey. "Thomas," he called to the manager, who had been standing nearby, wide-eyed, "put Miguel in charge of her retraining. Let's make sure she understands what the Grand Oak is all about." Thomas nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. Absolutely." The room, which had been so tense moments before, suddenly erupted into applause. It wasn't just for Clint, it was for the lesson he had imparted. A lesson about respect, humility, and the values that truly matter. The older couple clapped first, followed by the young influencers who seemed genuinely moved. Even the tech executives set their phones down long enough to join in. As the applause faded, Clint stood up, leaving a generous tip on the table. He glanced back at the room, his expression calm but meaningful. "Let's make sure this place stays special," he said before walking toward the exit. And so, the Grand Oak carried on, not just as one of LA's finest restaurants, but as a beacon of respect and authenticity in a world often obsessed with appearances. On any given Friday, you might still see Clint Eastwood sitting at his favorite corner table, quietly sipping his whiskey, ensuring that the spirit of real class and timeless values remains alive and well.